Welcome to the Microsoft Security Insights Podcast with your hosts, Franklin Grimberg and Edward Walton, where we discuss Microsoft 365 security and Azure security news and products. Recorded March 30th, 2022. Good evening, Franklin. Good evening, Rod. No, Brody, and good evening to our guests, Chris and Joe. How you doing, Rod?
I'm doing fairly well. I feel like I'm doing a lot better than Frank. Poor Frank, he's sick and not feeling well tonight. Apparently, he's preparing for a stomach ache for next week, I guess, when he might have dinner with you, Ed.
Probably so.
Something like that.
I hate if Frank feeling bad. I don't wish that on anybody. I'm a big baby when I'm sick, so I get it.
I just want people to leave me alone when I'm sick. Just let me be sick. Let me go away somewhere. So this week's what we're on. Oh man, middle of the week already. Seems like the weeks get away from me more and more. My entire life, as much as I absolutely love Microsoft Security and Microsoft Sentinel, my entire life has become KQL. Everything is KQL at this point. I don't know. It's like when you're in a foxhole and you stick your head up and you're like the target for whatever that thing is. I'm the target for KQL right now. I'm building a 3-hour workshop to the beta test next week internally. So
cool.
If that goes well, man,
it'll be good. You should have knew that was going to happen with the success of your must-learn KQL newsletter and blog post. It's not only is a good read, it's a great reference just to go back to. I learned KQL the wrong way. I got thrust into it. I had opportunity. I think I told you guys learn it years, at least a year or and a half before I even got into Sentinel.
Yeah.
Because the guy told me that, hey man, this is the data query language and we use it. And he's like, it's Custo. I'm like, I got too many other things to do. Hindsight being 2020 or 2016, how good your vision is, right? So I had to go back and forget all the KQL I learned because I learned it piecemeal. Then I went through the learn piece, and then I went through your course, and I just download the PDF. I keep it as a reference now. I keep your entire book. So, yeah. Well, me, not a whole lot of interesting work this week. Been doing some stuff with IoT this week. I've been really IoT focused. I don't get that. I support it, but
I do.
Yeah.
I said in a meeting last week, one of our primary priorities from security this next year is IoT.
So I learned about it. My group onboarded and incubated CyberX acquisition. They come through my team and we bolt them on, right? And then they go out and spread goodness. So I'm not by any means the lead, but I'm having to get more involved. So. And plus, I learned something really cool. I sort of knew it, but I didn't. Is that when you have MDE on the same subnet as an IoT device, it discovers it, even without an active scan. I thought you had to do it via active scan. Now, something's going on in my network. Maybe I have a VLAN too heavily and it's stopping broadcast, but I know I have a bunch of stuff that should be showing up. One of our buddies, Matt Egan, showed me his, and it picked up everything from his Garmin watch to his Sonos.
Get out of here.
Yeah. And I got all this. It didn't come up. Other than that,
that's cool stuff.
Did a little bit of MDI work with a customer, just architectural and just an overview. And that's it. One last thing. Oh yeah, I think I handed it off to you because I was out last week. That personal stuff is that writing that playbook.
Oh yeah.
So thanks for helping with that in that logic app.
Yep.
Oh man, and one other thing I want to say to all our listeners: I was out last week in a very bad place. I lost a really really close friend. Very tragically, it hurt me sort of bad, man. I'm still not right in the way she passed. So I'm gonna be out next week attending funerals, and I lost another buddy.
No way.
Yeah, it's but you and Franklin and Brody kept checking in on me, man. So I appreciate that.
Yep. Well, we sort of like you, so we like to see you stick around for a little while.
I know, right?
Yep.
I know.
Sorry to hear that, Bert.
Yeah, it's the first loss was just super unexpected, and I won't go into details, so I don't share private stories, but yeah. But anyway, I won't ask Franklin what he's up to other than being sick, and let him, sick dogs lie and just stay where they are. But I'd like to go ahead and get both of our guests who've come on to talk to us about the goodness of Microsoft Defender for Identity and give the evolutionary path on how it got to be MDI. Because what got me working on this particular product is I was one of the few people that had ATA experience way back in the day, right? I don't know, I happenstance, I got introduced to ATA, right? So I'll let them go through the whole track. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christopher Smith and Joe, and I'm going to butcher your last name, Joe. Anich. Anich. Got it. They'll tell you I'm terrible at names, right? So, Joe, you go first since I met you via Trevor Stewart.
Yep.
And then hand it off to Chris. So do an intro, sir, and do your thing.
Yeah. So Joe Anich, again, thanks for having me back again. This was a lot of fun. Senior CE here at Microsoft. I work with Chris, actually. We're in a little niche team called the CEIR team. Attach ourselves to Dart engagements, and do what we do best, and that's we focus really heavily in MDE, so Defender for Endpoint, the whole umbrella that is MDE, and then MDI. MDI is probably one of the most important tools that we get out there during engagements. But we do tactical hardening as well. We've got a pretty robust team of engineers that are focused in security and are kind of a multi-tool for Dart when they need customer-facing type related work. So, love
the shirt.
Thank you. Yeah, it came in a nice little swag box. You work with those guys enough, they send you over some cool stuff.
That's cool.
Full flag right over there. And I'm actually moving over to that team, not next week but the week after. So excited about that. But yeah, turn it over to Chris.
Ironically enough, that's the Arctic swag shirt, so that's right in line with the conversation topic for today. I'm Christopher Smith, if my mother is calling me. I've been at Microsoft for a little bit, going on 2 years now. Currently a customer engineer, previously support engineer for Defender for Identity, as well as Defender for Cloud Apps. So that was honestly my first real exposure to Defender for Identity, and it was a trial by fire. Came out the other end, and now I'm working alongside Joe to help with those rapid deployments in those instances where customers that we're interacting with are caught with their pants down, proverbially speaking. That being said, I like doing what I do because I want to help profess standards of best practice when it comes to security-related concepts, as well as just provide people with the knowledge, the tools, and the direction which they can go in. So when I'm not helping customers with Defender for Identity or Defender for Endpoint or any of the other Defender for SOC drawer type products, I'm helping to develop organizations' incident response capacities through proactive engagements brought on by the detection and response team. And that's me.
Very cool.
That is awesome. So you say a lot of times as you deploy this rapidly, you catch these customers with their pants down. And thanks for the proverbially. I guess my first question, I'm just absolutely just the most curious person in the world when it comes to things like this. What are you finding as soon as you deploy MDI? What are the customers compromised already?
So, in any and all circumstances where Joe and I are finding ourselves engaged in the capacity of assisting Dart, that's always going to be in a responsive capacity. But there are instances where I am also assisting customers with proactive deployments. And in those circumstances, we usually find some very interesting behavior. Sometimes it's just applications behaving in interesting ways. Sometimes it's actual nefarious behavior that ends up escalating into some form of response activity. So Mileage may vary, and there's a lot of reasons for why that is. And namely, if we think about the complexities of a system like Active Directory, there's a lot of logging intricacies that are created as a result of trying to monitor those domain controllers. And a lot of the native functionality that is provided by Windows Event Logging may or may not have the capability of capturing those artifacts that will indicate some form of malicious activity. To that point, there's plenty of functionality that's available natively by the event logs, but Defender for Identity is going to be taking different approaches to how that information is captured, and it's going to, let's call it, separate itself from a purely event-based solution. And that's where the visibility and interest comes in terms of what am I going to find when I turn over this rock?
Yeah.
My question would be, actually, let's level set a little bit. We're using acronyms, and I know most of our users are understanding, but let's run back a little bit and talk about what is MDI. You gave us an idea of what it does, but can you tell us what it is and why it's needed?
All right. Let's. I'm going to take it even a step further back than that and talk threat landscape for a second, because I think that's going to help create a reason for MDI. And if we take a look at the threat landscape, everyone's big ticket item right now is ransomware. And if we take a look at TTPs, those the tactics, techniques, and procedures that are being used by threat actors that are deploying ransomware in environments, generally speaking, they're going to follow a very well-defined path of escalation. If we were to phrase it in terms of something like the cyber kill chain, there's going to be reconnaissance activities, there's going to be lateral movement activities, privilege escalation activities, things that are going to happen for them to obtain actions on objectives. In the case of ransomware, it's gain enough control of the environment to wreak havoc. And in any and all of those circumstances, the onus is on the threat actor to compromise identity, because if we take a look at modern environments, identity is the cornerstone that allows us to enable functionality. It's going to control how we're accessing things, where we're accessing things, and even when we're accessing things. So those threat actors are targeting domain controllers, Active Directory itself, and ultimately identity, to be able to have actions on objectives, deploy that ransomware payload. And as a result, there is a need for us as defenders, as responders, to have visibility into that environment. Again, you can capture event logs. It's going to do something, but it's not going to capture everything. So to your point earlier about the evolution of Defender for Identity, first place we should start is Advanced Threat Analytics. 100% the precursor to Defender for Identity. If listeners aren't familiar with Advanced Threat Analytics, it was a on-premises, self-hosted solution that monitored domain controllers for authentication activity and other sorts of activity related to attacks on Active Directory by way of sensors that were either sitting adjacent to or on our domain controllers. And those sensors were capturing things like network traffic, event logs, and passing that data over to a centralized ATA center that was doing correlation and collation to identify patterns of behavior that are associated with threat actor activity. Mm-hmm. Now, fast forward a couple of years, Advanced Threat Analytics still exists in the sense of what it's doing. It's just witnessed a couple of iterations. So from Advanced Threat Analytics, we got Azure Advanced Threat Protection, and this just becomes a matter of taxonomy. But Azure Advanced Threat Protection, as some listeners may know it as, is a cloud-hosted version of Advanced Threat Analytics, with a caveat being that instead of having things sit parallel to our domain controllers, there was more emphasis put on deploying sensors to those domain controllers. That's going to allow us to have deeper hooks, better visibility into the environment, and it also reduces complexity of management. Think of ATA, like we have to have gateways that are going to be capturing data. We're going to have the ATA center. We're going to have to update both of those things and the underlying operating systems. And Azure Advanced Threat Protection sought to remediate that by having a single sensor that you deploy onto those domain controllers that is self-updating, self-maintaining, and fingers crossed, knock on wood, it has never caused any sort of issues that require reboots as it's executing that update process. So it was a very seamless solution and a no-brainer in the sense that it was providing us visibility into our Active Directory environment and doing so in a manner that's going to identify a lot of the common tactics, techniques, procedures that are going to be used by threat actors. And then
I'm sorry.
We just changed the name in 2021. That's it.
So let me give a little color commentary to a couple of things that you said. It used to be a primarily, almost exclusive, a on-premise deployment because it was necessary to monitor authentication and your authentication fabric and methodologies on your Active Directory, right? So there wasn't anything really cloud specific. It modified itself or evolved. And what you were talking about is a sensor that goes on a domain controller is also known as the lightweight gateway. Okay. And that was a overlay, or it used to be called an agent. And that agent used to be heavy when it was associated with ATA, but as it matured, it became the lightweight gate sensor. And it greatly reduced the computational requirements. All right. So it didn't put a lot of drag on a domain controller. Even if it's did, it's intelligent enough to throttle itself back, so it doesn't mess up the primary role of a domain controller. The other reason that they went to that, so that our listeners understand, is that why wasn't that there from the beginning? Well, it wasn't there because it wasn't invented yet. And the other thing was, it became necessary because one of the deployment models was onerous when you had to span or mirror ports to your domain controller. I could count the clients on one hand. They had a total control of their networking infrastructure. They could effectively span ports across their entire infrastructure. They just could not. They either did not have the same vendor from place to place. So spanning a port on Cisco is not the same as spanning a port from the task perspective on an HP ProCurve, Asteria, and all these things, right? So, but yeah, so that's a good breakdown. I'm going to ask this question to Joe. Christopher has come back and he said all these things that it does, but I need to understand, is MDI a protect mechanism, a detect mechanism, or both? Does it do anything to protect you?
It's detect. It doesn't do any active blocking. So it's to surface things. It's to get you to understand your identity landscape within Active Directory. Okay. It does some things out of the box, but it also goes through some learning periods that Chris might have memorized by this point. It starts to understand what's common, what's not common. Are these activities something that this person does all the time? And so it goes through learning periods, but it's really a detect utility. It doesn't do any active blocking. And I don't really have anything to share like timeline wise if something's coming down the road, but there's like, what was the latest thing that we added, Chris? Is that you can not reset accounts. What was it? What is the identity action that we can take now? Is it? I'm totally blanking on what we just added.
It's to compare it to something like Azure AD, which is I think what predicated the creation of that feature would be like the ability to suspend user accounts, to disable user accounts. Reset passwords just programmatically from that single pane of glass being that M365 Defender portal.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I'm glad that's going to eventually be built in, because what I've had to do is do a combination of things, is write a logic app if Sentinel picks it up, right, to come in to be able to do it. I actually saw someone able to do some interesting things out of MDI first time using Power Automate. Right, so they wanted to go that route. So, and then they incorporated the playbooks and everything.
Yeah.
What is the largest? implementation you've seen of MDI? Domain
Well,
controller size, because the largest one I've ever done was a customer that had like 25 domain controllers, but I can imagine global companies have a lot.
Yeah, we've done. Trying to think of the largest one, maybe like 250, 260, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
A couple hundred for sure. I'm not sure if we've eclipsed 300 in any of them, but 200s.
And I'll tell you why I asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
I had a customer that says, "Yeah, we want to do it, but we have domain controls all over the world, right?" And they in their sites and services, you can see their subnets defined. Like, oh, you're right, you got domain controls all over the world. What's the deployment model that you've seen utilized when we need to get this sensor on all the domain controllers? Because there is no automated way to this day, recon domain controllers, and so that all you have to do is drag and drop into it. You still have to type them in there, right? So it's two things I'm asking. What is the preferred automation or deployment methodology to get these sensors out on all of the domain controllers? And for our listeners that are familiar with the MDI setup, you have to go in and define the domain controllers inside the MDI portal. So how do you address the first one? Major deployment, and then the second one, adding them to actually report in.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we look at like if we were to do like a really diligent deployment, I say diligent because when it comes to like an IR engagement, you're not necessarily looking at, hey, let's run the analyzer tool or the sizing tool run for 24 hours to see if we need to, add some resources to machines. It's like, no, we need to get these things out now. We need to understand what's going on. If we run into machines to make chores that have a lack of resources, they pretty much shed light on themselves when we're trying to install. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to like mass deployment, we don't really have anything from a documentation perspective. And I think that's primarily, and Chris can expand on this, primarily because of, the workload at hand, right? It's a sensitive workload. And also, .NET is, .NET 4.7 is one of the main requirements. If you don't have that, that'll cause a reboot. So it comes down to kind of manually understanding, like, do you have maintenance windows? How are we going to handle the reboots? Are we just going to let it fly in production, which we've done many a times? But I think the primary automation, SCCM is an obvious one if it's there. And really that just boils down to, getting NPCap out there. What I like to do, what I've had good luck with is just creating the SCCM package. And sorry for all of the hardcore SCCM folks that want to use an application package. I just create a bundled package where package up NPCap with a command line that, gets my NPCap to install the way I want it to, which really is the default. And then it lays down the sensor. And I just make one a dependency of the other. So it installs NPCap, make sure that that's there first, and then it installs the MDI sensor. And then if we need to worry about reboots, then we leverage that through maintenance windows.
That's an approach. You said that, and you made me think about something. Is neither one of you mentioned it. That means that you guys work at it so much you just go, "Oh, I forgot about that." I never heard either of you mention the capacity planner, right? Which I love that particular simplistic PowerShell that command that runs the script. I was wondering that if in the capacity planner, and I haven't looked at it in a while, because generally the customer runs it before I get there, and then they talk about which ones they want to go, deployment methodologies. Does the capacity planner, and to our users, the capacity planner is a PowerShell script that enumerates your directory and takes a snapshot of the health, the capacity, and everything about your domain controllers, right? And sort of gives you a soft recommendation which ones are eligible to have the sensor and which ones need a little bit more oomph to them. CPU, network, stuff like that. Let me ask you this question. Does the capacity planner know if you don't have the applicable .NET library on there? Because that would be a cool feature to say, oh, we got 55 domain controllers and 7 of them need a new .NET before we can actually do it. It doesn't.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure it does not. That would seem like a pretty nifty thing to add in. I would imagine that. Well, I'm not a programmer, but it seems like it would be an easy thing to add in.
I can
Using
write it.
SCCM, you could probably do that check beforehand, though, right?
Oh yeah, and we do. Just a quick wmine query or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because it can write. It's a PS script. I can go in and write in a dependency check inside of it and run it, right? But you got to get it published to the download to be able to do it. But yeah, the SE, yeah.
No, I was gonna say if you're leveraging maintenance windows, I mean, also it doesn't matter because if it needs to reboot, we're in a maintenance window anyways, so let it rip. But yeah, see if we can get that added.
And so with MDI, it manifests in the unified security portal. If you go down to settings and comes over, is that going to? And I don't remember if I saw it. Is that portal going to get an upgrade here soon? The old MDI portal.
Oddly enough, there was a. For the listeners that have interacted with Defender for Identity previously, they're probably accustomed to accessing it by way of portal.atp.azure.com. That is generally where the interface for interacting with Defender for Identity is hosted. But as of, I'm not going to say a specific date, but since the beginning of this year, there has been new features that have essentially migrated the management and alerting functionalities of Defender for Identity over to that security.microsoft.com portal. So not only are we managing Defender for Endpoint, but we're also managing Defender for Identity, all within that single pane of glass that we've been going for since Ignite 2021. And it's definitely changed the experience because not only has it surfaced those configuration options, but it's also surfaced a lot more data in way of advanced hunting. So, I mean, I literally was just talking to a customer earlier this afternoon about being able to leverage that unified security portal to be cognizant of activities in the environment and leverage advanced hunting to look for stuff. And because we've created that iteration, we've moved data over from that legacy portal to that new unified portal, I can direct customers to must-learn KQL and have them querying all of that data that's coming out of Defender for Identity directly from within Advanced Hunting, which totally increases capacity. It reduces the need to collect logs from domain controllers. Not that they shouldn't be collected, but a lot of that important information is going to surface itself. It's really, really an awesome iteration of the product.
Very cool. Yeah, it's growing. It seems to be one of the products that Microsoft is giving, food to and air so it can grow and mature. It seems like some of the other products seem to be stalling out of that Defender suite, right? And that leads me to my next question. This is for you, Christopher. Is it an M365 workload or is it an Azure workload? How do you? Because the way you procure it is through a SKU, but the way you enable it is through cloud, which it doesn't really have the same type of SKU. So why is it still sort of attached to the E5 SKU?
That is a philosophical question that I probably couldn't answer because I am not one to like navigating around our licensing structure, as I'm sure many of the listeners are. But for context, Defender for Identity is going to fall under the purview of generally any E5 security license, a general E5 license, as well as E5 enterprise mobility and security. And to the point of, is it an Azure workload? Is it an M365 workload? 100%, it's going to be an M365 workload. I can't comment on what led to that conclusion, despite the fact that it was previously named Azure Advanced Threat Protection. But the really important part is that there's customers out there that have E5 licensing. They have access to Defender for Identity, and they may or may not have it deployed. And in a lot of cases, we're finding customers that just aren't leveraging the benefits of something like the visibility that Defender for Identity is providing, which is really painful.
Yeah. It is one of the quieter security products that we have, but if it is talking, you better listen.
Yeah.
I figured that out.
Yeah. I've had several engagements in the last couple of months where I'm there for something MDE related, and then I mentioned MDI, and they're like, I kind of get that look like they don't know what it is, and I was like, are you guys using MDI? And it's like, I've never even heard of it. It's like, let's get going. Let's get after that.
So let me ask a technical question, and I hand the floor back over to Rod. I know he's interested in asking questions. Is the MongoDB still the core DB of it for storing configurations, heuristics, and stuff like that? Is it still MongoDB backend?
I can't even comment on what's on the back end because it's all in the cloud. But the one thing that our admins don't have to worry about is rotating that darn certificate every year, because that was the biggest pain point with the ATA Center. If you miss that certificate renewal period, bye-bye ATA data.
Yes, that was one of the things had the not privilege, but I had to sit on one of those calls, and the customer doesn't want to hear there's no way. Right, you can't get that back, right? So I totally get that. I've only encountered that one time when that was missed, because I knew nothing about what they were talking about, and then smart people to me were on the call, and I'm like, oh, okay, that is bad. Don't let that happen. Okay, I would suspect that if it's probably in Azure, it's probably Cosmos DB or something, or some specialized scalable database. Who knows, right? Beyond that. Rod, did you have some questions? It seemed like you were itching to ask something.
Well, I just, I have a couple coming up I think are important, but just a little commentary on the E5 or the 5 licenses that everybody tends to buy. It's like that, and I'm that way. It's like that person that goes in and you're offered a few different, items, whatever it is, and you look at it, probably the middle of the road's probably going to do you just as good as the high end, but most people just buy the high end and I appreciate these companies that buy these E5 and A5, G5 stuff, and because they're literally buying everything, right? But yeah, I do see that quite a bit. I think it's something, at least for our listeners, should realize that. I'm glad we're talking about MDI tonight, because it is one of kind of those little hidden pieces of value in that E5 licensing that a lot of customers don't realize that they have and they could take advantage of. In fact, man, I wish somebody for a lot of these companies would just literally go through and figure out exactly what it is that they have. Because I think a lot of times they see a couple things, a couple products or services, and they're like, oh, I've read about this. I must have this. We need this for our organization. And then they totally forget the rest of it. It all works together so well. And we're talking about Defender for Identity. Identity is absolutely the first piece of security. If you don't get your identity under control, you've literally skipped an entire area when you move to everything else, which kind of leads me to the next question. Well, it leads to a question. That wasn't a question. That was me just standing on my soapbox. Leads to a question. How many of the customers, so, we talked about MDI, it's exposing these threats or potential threats or what have you, but there's really no reaction as part of this service other than, customers knowing what they need to do about it. How many of our customers are utilizing some of the other services, the other things like connecting MDI to a SIEM, or some other tool that's going to allow them to provide some kind of actionable responses?
Well, you go ahead, Chris.
You're the one that deals with the response more than I do, man. You go for it.
Yeah, I don't see it. I don't want to say it at all. I definitely have seen it a couple of times, but it is very, very low percentage of customers that have that. Because again, it comes down to them not even knowing that they have it, or not knowing really what it is. Even if they have heard of it, or even if they do have it, they don't know how they can extend it and extrapolate out the data that they're getting from it into other things. And that comes down to a couple of things, I'm sure. I mean, it's not entirely their fault. It could be time looking at things, education. I mean, be a couple of things in that realm of just not having the expertise or time to understand what they can do with that data beyond just installing it. But I haven't seen very many. I mean, probably single digits in probably the last 20 engagements, maybe 2 that had it going out somewhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, the one I'm on right
bit.
was the first one for me anyway, where we could hunt like they had Sentinel, and they had it for a long time, and so we were actually doing most of our hunting in Sentinel for them, which is cool. That's actually what kind of made me I saw that tweet, Rod, and I was like, man, I could use that internal core, like a deeper version or something, and just go deep with Rod on KQL for a week.
Yeah.
Sorry to hurt your feelings, but not very many, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's painful. Well, that's another, I think, little messaging thing we need to all those folks that have the C5 stuff. Number one, make sure you're utilizing, because you think about this, you're paying X for this licensing model, right? And you're not getting every bit of it. It's like that guy that buys that high-end car and has it for 2 years and finally figures out how to roll down the windows, right? You have all this capability in here. You need to be able to take advantage of it. I feel bad for customers. And then on the other side of that, MDI is great. It's going to expose that stuff, but now you gotta send it somewhere that's going to correlate it with the rest, aggregate it with the rest of your environment. Because identity is one piece. It's a very important piece, but it's one piece of security. You need to pull it together with everything else to tell the story. You have a compromised account. Yep. Thumbs up. We found it. But why was it compromised, right? Was it an email? Was it ransomware? Was it, who knows? So.
Yeah. Where I have seen Sentinel used more is with like managed SOCs. If customers have like a managed SOC service, I've seen a couple that are leveraging Sentinel as their SIEM, which is really cool to see. So I've seen it more in that than in situations that we find ourselves in on a daily basis. Yeah. You got to think, some of the customers that we work with, don't exactly have some of the best configurations, which, we really look to help them with. It's really an education thing. We like to leave them in a much better position, right? It's no time to shame a customer. It's years of attrition of people leaving, coming and going. It's a lot of things. And we just really aim to kind of leave them in a better spot education-wise.
Well, that's another piece of that too. Those folks that are buying these E5, these 5 licenses, right? Most of them have access to us, right, to help them with that stuff. I don't know. It's just difficult to reach out, I guess, sometimes, but we could absolutely help them with every bit of that. So
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joe. You were finishing up. I was going to ask the tech question next.
So I do not so much anymore, but I used to do a lot of pre-sales. A new program that Trevor and I actually kind of started internally to help solve kind of that gap of assigning customer engineers to account managers during account renewals. And to really address the fact that it's like the first question that we ask is like, first we have like an internal powwow where we talk about the customer, their history with them, what licensing they have, which is like my favorite question to ask. And it's like, oh, they have E5. Oh, this is going to be fantastic. And then it's talking to them about, hey, what are your next 12 months look like? And then, they list a few things they want. And it's like, oh, you're leveraging Intune or co-management or MDI or like, and they're like, no, we're not using any of these things. It's like, this is going to be a fun 12 months for you guys. But it's really just trying to get them to saturate the E5 to get what they're paying for. So from like an education standpoint, it's a lot of like, you can get a CE for a little while. You can get some proactive credits. You can buy a little bucket of hours and have sort of a little extension to your team, to your operations team to get some of these things implemented, which I have a lot of fun doing that. I really enjoy those conversations with customers.
My next question would be to either Joe or Chris. Since we're going to just go ahead and say that MDI is part of the E5 SKU, security SKUs, whatever it may be, which of the other products does it pair up the best with? Because you have MDO, MDE, MCADP, and something else.
Yeah.
So which is I don't get it. Which product is it's a Robin to the Batman?
So There is a very, 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 very close tie between Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps. In fact, it is a necessitated sort of connection in the sense that Defender for Identity is going to be surfacing data to Defender for Cloud Apps, and then Defender for Cloud Apps is going to be, for all intents and purposes, regurgitating that data over to Advanced Hunting. So the philosophical reasons for things like that happening is if we take a look at the type of information that's going to be coming out of something like Defender for Cloud Apps, it's going to be information pertaining to what users are doing and how users are doing things. Mm-hmm. And if we align that with the workloads that they may be accessing and identify that, hey, they're going to need some semblance of identity to be able to access those workloads, then being able to paint that direct picture of how was this user able to access this at this time when it's abnormal behavior for them is going to paint a really good picture, especially from that on-premises to cloud perspective. And then add on Azure AD identity protection onto that within Defender for Cloud Apps, and then you get a very solid picture of how identities are being used to access information in a SaaS environment. Additionally, there was previously a Defender for endpoint integration with the legacy ATP portal. What that did was just align those Defender for Identity alerts on one hand and then bring those MDE alerts on the other hand, and that helped to develop the understanding of maybe how something happened. And I think both of those concepts have just sort of meshed into M365 Defender, and having that identity alert aligned with the endpoint alert with maybe a Defender for Office 365 email alert is going to help to develop that full forensic timeline of how exactly somebody stepped into my environment, what they did, how they did it, when they did it, and what I need to do to be able to kick them out.
Yeah, it all comes down to enrichment.
Yeah, enrichment. Yeah. Are you guys? I say you guys. You don't own the product. You're practitioners of the product. Is there anything on the roadmap to improve SIEM integration beyond Sentinel? So, Sentinel's a no-brainer, right? The connections are there. You got MCAS, but what about SIEM integration outside of Microsoft's SIEM product? Is that going to be improved a little bit? Because right now it's sort of mundane.
Yeah. So actually, unbeknownst to me, I just casually stumbled upon it. But for those of you that are jumping into Sentinel, if you take a look at some of those connectors that are associated with M365, there's a small portion of those that are coming soon to a theater near you kind of thing. And those are tables that are associated with Defender for Identity, namely the identity directory events tables, identity query events tables. And these tables are essentially telling us everything that's happening in regards to identity, on-premises identity. Previously, the only integration that we had natively within Defender for Identity to get data from Defender for Identity over to a SIEM solution was a syslog connector or Defender for Cloud Apps. And in those instances, there may or may not have been a lack of verbosity in the content of those tidbits of information. If I'm looking at a data set, I want more data. That allows me to massage the data the way that I want it to, paint the picture the way that I want it to be painted. And that capacity just didn't really exist for a little bit. Fast forward 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that data is starting to be published by way of this streaming API that's available within M365. So a lot of organizations that I've been working with lately are not Sentinel customers, sad face, but they're using something like Splunk, they're using something like LogRhythm, QRadar to get data out of M365 into that centralized aggregation point. And as of today, as of last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, it just kind of popped up for me. You can take all of that data that's coming into those identity query tables, identity directory event tables, and ship them off to your on-premises SIEM as well. So that's just surfacing even more data that's relevant not only to endpoint response, but Active Directory response as well.
How do you do that? You're talking about shipping it off. I've not had opportunity beyond the basic syslog integration and point to an IP address that's the collector. You're saying you can ship the. Let me change the question. Are you talking about alerts and notifications? Or are you talking about raw logs?
I'm talking about the latest and greatest from everything that's coming out of either Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps, and even Defender for Office 365. Okay. Within M365 Defender, that's that security.microsoft.com portal, there are configurations that are surfaced to customers that allow them to leverage a streaming API. That streaming API is going to ship data off from the M365 Defender backend to a Azure Event Hub. And with that Azure Event Hub, we can take that data and ingest it into any of our logging sources that we need. Additionally, there's plenty of other things that we can do with that data as well. Especially if we're big Azure consumers, we can apply things like Stream Analytics to help filter out data. We can send things off to data lakes. Really, the sky's the limit once we start talking about getting the data to those event hubs. But that ability to take that data out of M365 and ship it to our on-premises SIEM is supported by those Azure Event Hubs and that M365 streaming API.
Mm-hmm. I was playing around with some API integration app registration today. I had to scratch my head on a couple things. When you don't do it all the time, you're like, wait a minute, how do you do this again? Right? Which permissions grant? I'm like, so okay, I get it. And with that, let's talk about competitors. Who's a competitor to the MDI product? I don't know. I mean, when I go, some people, because when I go in to deploy it, they very rarely am I displacing competition. Right? This is net new. They did not have this feature. They may have had something that sort of did it, but it wasn't really entity or authentication behavior. Somebody tried to say CyberArk, and I was like, no, that's not right. CyberArk is more competitive to PIM, right? So, do you guys happen to know offhand? Does MDI have any competition?
The one competitor that I am conscious of is, I believe, a company called Simperis that has a very niche sensor that's focused on monitoring Active Directory. But besides that, a lot of the monitoring that would be coming out of Active Directory from other competitors would be very not so targeted plugins that would allow them to monitor things like Active Directory. It's not a purpose-built, function-built application. It's not focusing on specifically those identity attacks. It's just an extension of an EDR capability. And I think that's really where Defender for Identity it differentiates itself, is that it's very purpose-built. We also develop Active Directory. So it kind of makes sense in the sense that we know what we're developing the tool for. We know the tool itself. We know our customers. And Active Directory is used quite prevalently across every organization ever.
Yeah, I want to say that
it is the glue. Even if they're competitors like Okta and everybody's still trying to figure out how to connect to AD or Azure AD, right? I've yet to find I've yet to find anybody who's using any form of identity to be solely on something else, right? They may have an Octave overlay and connection B2C or B2B or something, but AD and Azure AD are like 365, right? It is the 900-pound gorilla. It is put on 100 pounds over the years. So, and there you go. I want to ask this to you, Joe. When you guys are responding to troubleshooting requests, I'll go with you first, Joe, then Chris, you chime in. What is one of the top issues that you have to go troubleshoot. Like, hey, this is not working. So what is the thing you come in and you like, oh, this is why?
I would say the biggest bucket is always going to be networking. Customer not understanding their network infrastructure on how to allow the sensors to talk out. And of course, if you're familiar with installing, if it can't talk out, I think that's one of the native checks that it does right away. Chris could probably fill in more technical details there, but if it can't talk out, the install just fails. But beyond that, trying to craft my words perfectly or carefully without alluding to any particular customers that I work with, so forgive me. Like missing root certs, if like some customers have just really ancient and archaic patching systems, patching practices, and root certs haven't been updated in quite some time, we run into that one probably. But honestly, networking is probably the biggest one.
Chris?
I'm trying to think. Yeah.
I just need one, and I'll give you what mine is. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, so I will say that all of the issues that ever come from Defender for Identity, having been in support, have been come deployment time. Like Joe alluded to, the understanding the network flow of the data that's coming out of Defender for Identity is the number one issue when it comes to onboarding. Beyond that, I've worked with several customers that have experienced a we'll call it a less than ideal scenario where Defender for Identity had some sort of impact on their environment post-deployment. You mentioned it earlier, and just to elaborate on it further, Defender for Identity is going to check itself before it proverbially wrecks itself by way of just monitoring resource utilization. And after it reaches a certain threshold, it's going to start to throttle down in favor of the availability of authentication activity. Mm-hmm. If customers aren't running a sizing tool prior to deploying things, they're going to come across that issue more frequently than not. And worst case scenario, we'll even have customers that I've worked with that there is some form of corruption to performance counters, and MDI could not even check itself. It ended up in a resource runoff and can bring services to a screeching halt if we aren't maintaining the health status of our domain controllers.
Yeah, we see the missing perf counters a lot, actually. More than.
So I'll give you mine. And mine's a little bit of both of you guys. When you said networking, you're right. And I'm going to give it a little bit of sub. When they are not allowing their domain controllers to talk directly to the internet, they got to go through a proxy. And it throws them off, right? And then we're messing with the networking team. And they're like, well, we're busy. What IP addresses? What do they need to go? Right? And some organizations do funnel and bridgehead all of their domain controller traffic through a proxy rather than direct access to it. So you can get through that. The other thing is, go back to what Christopher said. The second thing I see most is when the domain controller is virtualized and it just acts a fool sometime, right? Whether it be Hyper-V or VMware, that sensor is always throwing out health alerts, right?
Yeah, I definitely see but those are more, post installation. It's like, it's getting like garbled data or it's, intermittent data back, and that's usually back to virtual machines. I actually don't see that very often.
I do when I see it, it lends back to the customer going to realize that their host is overburdened, right? And they got all this dynamic allocation of resources trying to be slick, right? Yeah. And not really understand that you should turn off that dynamic, especially when people are coming into work. There's a huge amount of authentication traffic when people first get to work, right? They're logging in. Yep. And so you're beating up on your domain controllers that way, even though it's not a super chatty authentication and exchange communication process. The domain controller is looking for certain things, and if something else is preventing that network adapter or something to happen. I see this all the time. The customers, it may not mean anything, but the customer goes, "What do you mean my domain controller is unhealthy?" That's not what it says. It's the customer. That's not what it's saying. You know, I'm gonna go yell at the server guys. No, 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 no. That's not what it's saying. Okay.
Yeah. One of the other sticking points is when we try to encourage GMSA accounts, just to get a little bit more of an enhanced security posture. Well, boy, I tell you, if you go down that rabbit hole and if they don't understand their environment and the domain trust, trying to use one GMSA for like their whole forest. Chris and I were just having this conversation, like literally before we got on this call with an organization. Well, for a customer engineer for an organization, and he had heard that, hey, can you use the MDI sensor like cross forest? And we're like, yeah, you can, because I think inherently you don't generally do that with GMSA accounts. At least our documentation, I think, alludes to it being more of a per domain thing. But in the context of MDI, yeah, you can go cross domain, across the forest. It just really comes down to creating the right local security group in the domain where you're creating the GMSA account, and then making sure that the groups of domain controllers that you're adding from other domains have two-way trust. And if it's set up right and you understand your hierarchy, you can absolutely use it that way. But that's definitely one of the sticking points, I think, is trying to get them to use GMSA accounts, and then it's just not working. And it's an arduous process too, because if you've got a big environment and you have a lot of accounts, I mean, the sensor tries to use every single one of them first. So
what I do to gently dissuade going that route, I ask a simple question: give me your most updated diagram of your directory. And a lot of customers don't have it.
Yeah.
Tell me how your directory is laid out. Well, we got no. Don't tell me. Give me something. Give me a Visio. Give me a printout. Give me an IO diagram. Let me look at it. And then, I said, well, export your sites and services subnetting, right? And let me take a look at how you have your stuff. And when you look at it, now they start to realize one of the best things I like about this tool, it will show deficiencies in your directory structure.
Oh, yeah.
It'll manifest the deficiencies in it. So I'm happy about that. Hey, I know we don't ask, stump the chump questions and all this other stuff, but we do ask learning questions. So I want to ask this learning question. I saw this alert, and I can read it, and I know what it is because I speak English, but it says, is this something that you guys have encountered, and how do you go about it? Because right now it seems that the customer doesn't really know how to or can't remediate it. Suspicious network connection over encrypting file system remote protocol. I'll let you guys choose who wants to talk about what that is and why and what are the possible reasons it's coming up. That's the actual name of the alert that's firing off, and it's listed inside of MDI/MCAS or MCAD, whatever, as a high. Is it a high, and why is it happening?
So I'm not kidding. I was just looking at an alert for this with a customer, and I'm going to bring up my notes here if you don't mind.
Do not mind.
So I think what we see with this, so if you have the alert up in front of you or a snippet or anything on it, you also see in the evidence that it is related to I'm probably going to slaughter this, Petit Potem alert. I don't know how people call it. But if you see that in the evidence, I think that's primarily why that one comes up, which is like abuse of INI files to make. Let's see if I can. What were the queries that I saw? DNS zones. What was it? Collect my thoughts here. I don't know if Chris, if you have like a documentation version of that particular alert. I know it's relatively new, I believe.
I can't actually say that I'm super familiar with that alert, and it's not one that I see very often. I would actually have to be able to review that actual TTP to be able to explain what would potentially be causing that alert. To that point, I think one of the stronger points of Defender for Identity is the fact that in any instance where you're observing alerts that are getting triggered, all of those alerts that do get triggered are going to provide the security analyst with a link to a guide that is going to help them to fully understand the context of the alert, what it could possibly be inferring, and what they should be doing to investigate it before they take that next step for triage. Maybe they want to pass it off to a tier 2 analyst. Maybe they want to raise the red flag and say, something's happening, we need help. But in either circumstance, the fact that we are surfacing that data is definitely an improvement in a lot of circumstances, because if we think about a lot of the alerts that we may be receiving from other applications, other services, it's just going to say, hey, bad stuff is happening. It's not going to say, hey, bad stuff is happening. Here's where it's happening. Here's how it's happening. Here are the artifacts for why it's happening. And also, here's what you should do about it. And I think it's definitely a good, a strong point of Defender for Identity. And to that point, I just politically danced around the question of, I don't know what that alert means, and I would need to research it.
So I was just looking back at it real quick, just to add a little bit of detail, because you were saying, you know, what caused it. In this particular alert, it was Nessus sending like DNS key queries and zone transfer queries. I don't know the reason.
Joe wins because that's what's setting it off at my customer. It's Tenable.
Yeah.
They're running a Tenable scanner, and that's doing it.
Yeah.
So I know what's doing it, but if you read the documentation, the remediation seems to imply that you need to patch your domain controllers.
Yeah.
Right. And I can almost say with certainty that patching the domain controller all the way up didn't really make it go away. So I don't really know what that Tenable automated scanner is doing. But I just seen it, and the culprit that's causing it, you're right, it was Tenable. It was a Nexus scanner doing that.
Yeah.
It was automated.
You can add exclusions, for each MDI rule or alert, I should say. So that was the route that this particular customer took. But yeah, when I started looking into that alert, when I actually just saw it like yesterday or the day before, looking at what was doing those query types, it was resolving back to the Nessus scanner.
Yeah, that's what happens. That's probably one of the only ones. I had a customer that just wanted to debrief a couple of times around. They had some red team come in, and they did a presumed breach. They're already on the internal network, and we just, the customer just tracked them. You can see where they were trying to create noise by acting like a script kiddie, making real, MCAS noise over here. They had ISOs purposely placed around where when MDE scanned, it detected malware, exploit software. But they were really just using that to try to mask a couple of pass the hash attacks, overpass the hash. I saw that. I saw, I don't know too. I thought I saw a golden key attack too, which I really didn't know how they generated that. I don't think that's on the Kali. I think that's on the Kali. That's unless they're running Bloodhound or something. I'm not really sure. That's more Franklin's expertise on the team. He's the red team guy, right? But man, this has been super informative. As you guys have been talking, I've been sort of going through my environment, my lab. It's not super interesting. I only have a couple of domain controllers unless I throw a attack machine. Let me tell you this. When I first got introduced to it, and then it transformed itself into a AATP, it was still one of the hardest products to demo because you got to have this environment, right? With domain controllers and active attacks and everything. Have we simplified that other than screenshots? Because when you have to go to a customer, I don't have an environment where I can just do all this stuff. I'm not about to stand this up and start running Bloodhound, Sparkhound, and all this other stuff. Has that evolved and we got a really good demo lab for that now? Or is it still there's whatever demos that the customer or partner spins up? It's still orchestrated.
I know. I'll cue in something that I think Chris will know a lot about because I know he delivers this particular thing. But there are tutorials or playbooks that you can run in your. I really don't see why you couldn't run them in your production environment, providing you, have guardrails on it in terms of this is where we're running it from. Let's clean up the tools and things that we create when we're done with this when this done with this exercise. But I know we have some like reconnaissance or compromise credentials. Looking at the doc real quick, domain dominance, lateral movement, some playbooks that you can go through that help you spin up. You could create a little structure in Active Directory with some accounts and make them do some funky things. It gives you a couple of tools that you can run non-maliciously, but will certainly generate some alerts and give you a nice, easy, pathway to understanding some of these things in production. You don't need a massive environment. I've done some of these things in my lab with one domain controller and been able to wrap my head around it. So you don't really need to make it that complex from an infrastructure standpoint to understand these things. But yeah, I'll let Chris add to that.
Yeah, so the alert tutorials that are available in the documentation are precisely that. They're going to hit a lot of the wickets in terms of understanding how Defender for Identity is going to be alerting and what the contents of those alerts will be like for things like pass a ticket, pass the hash, across to reconnaissance alerts and all the way up to domain dominance alerts. Things like golden tickets, the implementation of skeleton keys on those domain controllers. But I think if you were to take something like that and then couple it with something like the Simuland lab that was developed as a result of a lot of the activity that we saw post-Solorigate, you have a very viable environment for assessing and understanding how something like Defender for Identity is going to work. Because not only are we going to be looking at domain controllers, I completely have left this out, but Defender for Identity is also going to be watching ADFS boxes as well. Yeah. And Simuland is developed for the precise reason of emulating a lot of those attacks that we saw come out as a result of Solorigate.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are a lot of things that surface up, and I'm the only other thing I wish I had prepared a little bit better is that if you do have integration set up with MCAS, you have the Unified Portal E5, that those alerts do manifest in there. Not every time, even with the data connector, I've found that it will go to Sentinel. So I can see the incident sometimes in Unified Portal, MDI, but when I go to Sentinel, sometimes the parity is not there. So I'm trying to figure out what that polling process is. And I did hear that integration is going to get better, where if you close out the incident in Sentinel, it's supposed to close it out on the other side, right? Which is, it's hard because you have multiple, engineering groups trying to make this happen, right? So you'll see what happens with that.
But the absolute massive amount of work going on with all of those teams merging into central portals, and it should only get better as time goes, as most things will.
I've seen improvements for sure. That when you do something in a little bit of delay, you can get back. But that seems to be the only one that doesn't have true one-to-one. Not that it's not doing it, but when I go back, I'm like, why didn't this alert come into Sentinel? And it's in a Unified Portal, and it was an alert that was high enough to. Most of the times, if stuff comes out of MDI, it's a high. It's going to generate severity of high, and then it's going to create that incident. So, but that's pretty good. Rod, did you have any questions, sir?
No, I think I'm good. I have really enjoyed myself listening to Chris and Joe. This is good stuff. I personally don't deal with MDI that often, except for the data that comes into Sentinel. And I can comply with what Ed was saying. It's kind of iffy right now, but it'll get better.
It'll get better. Hey, I'm going to ask the question before we let our two guests go for today. I don't want to hold them up. Oh, Chris, where are you located? First, I don't. Are you?
I'm based out of Richmond, Virginia.
Okay, I like Richmond. I've come up there and cycle in the event up there, and I've also run the half up there before.
Oh yeah, we got plenty of trails up here.
Yeah. What about you, Joe? Where are you located again?
I'm in Wisconsin.
That's right. You told me that. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this: excluding MDI, what is your next most favorite product? MDE, MCAS, MDO.
Well, if I could say MDE and it means the umbrella, so the EDR, ASR, and AV, then I'm saying MDE. But
okay. What about you? What about you, Christopher?
I am a hardcore proponent for Defender for Cloud Apps, formerly MCAS. So
that man wins a free shirt from the podcast. Joe gets no shirt.
That's fine.
Just kidding. It's a running joke that MCAS is one of my favorite products. It had been for a long time, but I sort of waffle. But I really, behind ATA, the second thing I cut my teeth on, when I started working with the Microsoft security products was MCAS. Ryan Hiffelman, all those guys, Mike Casas, Jared Popperman, all those guys, I knew them pretty well. I learned a lot from those guys, right? But hey, I don't have any other questions. Anything you guys would like to share to our listeners and watchers? We can grab stuff after the call where we can amplify your brand, your LinkedIn, your Twitter, your whatever you may be. But is there anything else you want to say? You got any books coming out?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, Edward. I really do. So myself and some other, way smarter people are writing a book. We're kind of taking I don't want to quite say Sys-Internals, because Sys-Internals is like one of the coolest books out there, but kind of that mindset. We're gonna do in depth with MDE. So there aren't really any MDE books out there. There really haven't been a Microsoft endpoint security book, since like SCEP that I can recall. I did some research. Maybe I missed some, but I couldn't find anything on endpoint security for Microsoft since SCEP. So, talking to a lot of people in the industry, there's definitely a huge need for it. MDE can be overly complex and confusing, and so we're going to try to right some of those wrongs. Not wrongs, but you know what I mean. Trying to add extra things that we can to the documentation, and go as deep as we can, as allowed by CILA on the product. So we really want to, show our passion. And so myself, one of the feature PMs for the unified agents, and then some ASR experts that we know are going to collab on a book for that. So it's going to be awesome. It's going to be a lot.
I'd like to see the book. I'm definitely looking for something that is not just what the product does, but I would love to see a book that starts off with deployment considerations, scenarios, architectures, and then and I don't like this term, best practices, but protection considerations. Because you're not going to be able to get the full value out of it unless somebody understands Intune / Microsoft Endpoint Management. You got to really know a little bit of both, right? And organizations that have a strong Intune / SCCM generally are really good consumers of MDE. They get it.
Yeah.
Right? They
a lot to shed light on for sure.
Yeah. Chris, what about you? Anything you want to tell our listeners and viewers?
If you need assistance deploying Defender for Identity, do not hesitate to reach out to your account manager today. Seriously, it's one of those things that it's just going to provide so much insight into the environment. And beyond that, in my off hours, I'll probably be caught technically reviewing Joe's book.
Okay. But thank you guys so much for joining our podcast. We really appreciate it. I know our listeners will. We get a lot of listenership more than viewership because people probably transitioning, working, whatever. But we can tell that our numbers are going up by virtue of every time we do a podcast, I get more invites to LinkedIn, right? So after we publish Wednesday, I'll get about 6 more connection requests, right? Say, hey, I listened to the pod. It's pretty good.
Hey, Rod, you want to talk about Reactor?
Oh,
we could mention that. Can you all hear me? Things are garbled on this, and anyway. If you can hear me, this podcast every third Wednesday of every month, we're going to start delivering this show live on Microsoft Reactor. So that will enable us, for those folks that have like live demos and stuff that generally kind of exhibit those on the show, but our videos and what have you don't hang around for very long afterwards. We will actually have a channel there on Microsoft Reactor, so all that stuff will be stored, all the history of the podcast. Plus, Microsoft Reactor is a huge media org within Microsoft. It's I think they have like 70,000 members already, so it's going to be pretty cool to be able to reach a much larger audience as well. So,
that's very cool.
Yeah, there'll be more detail coming to our listeners and everything ongoing to improve the pod, improve the knowledge exchange. So, with that being said, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Christopher. This has been super informative. It solidifies what I thought I knew about it, and then you guys actually is like, oh, I didn't know that. So when you saw me clicking around, I went in there and I did that, right? Because I have to flip between products, right? So it takes me a minute to say, okay, I'm doing Sentinel this time, right? All right. But to our listeners, thanks so much. Once again, we'll be back next Wednesday. We have guests actually booked out to June, and some people are requesting now, so I got to figure out that scheduling, right? I don't know if we ever get Trevor back. He's made too many people mad, and they're like, "I wish he would come back on the show. I wish he would."
That's funny.
And that's it. To our listeners. With that being said, everyone, good night. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for hosting.
Thanks, Rod. Thanks, Frank.
Oh, by the way, Frank, we need to get like an ending audio thing for our podcast.